I dispute your interpretation.
Simply not true.
Absolute garbage.
Do you owe an apology to those in the community that have been subjected to misdeeds by some of these individuals?
I will not be apologising for upholding the law, and I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt.
The government today defiant.
I am not going to apologise for wanting to re-detain people who are an unmanageable risk to the community. I'm just not.
Pushing through emergency laws to make it possible to re-detain non-citizens. Making matters worse, news late today, a fourth recently released refugee was arrested, charged with breaching curfew and allegedly stealing luggage at Melbourne Airport. 3 others accused of crimes ranging from drug possession to indecent assault to contact with minors from a convicted child predator.
Legislation that says if you might commit a crime in the future, then you can get locked up, and it's going to be treating people who are born in another country in a different way to the way that we run the legal system here in Australia.
It comes in the wake of last month's landmark High Court ruling against indefinite immigration detention, which triggered the release of 148 detainees. Among them, convicted criminals.
First of all, you could have made a much better submission to the High Court, and so you botched that. Then you released all of those detainees when the writ said you only had to release one.
The decision of the High Court sets a new limit on the power to detain anyone.
They have been playing politics with this for weeks. Let's call it for what it is, garbage and lies.
The government now in political freefall, refusing to say how many of the released detainees these new laws would apply to.
How many of the released detainees will you make immediate applications for to the court?
Surely you have that number. How many, for example, have committed a murder or an unlawful killing?
There are difficulties in some instances with providing detailed information.
But with each released detainee a possible landmine waiting to go off, can the government regain control?
I will not be apologising for acting in accordance with a High Court decision. Your question is an absurd one.
Chief Political Correspondent for the Sunday paper, Karen Middleton, joins us now. Karen, this story is going from bad to worse. What more can you tell us about this fourth arrest?
Well, we understand there was a Sudanese man who was arrested in Victoria, alleged offence committed on the 1st of December relating to allegedly stealing luggage from a sleeping traveller and also breaching visa conditions relating to his residence. So he'll be facing court on those charges.
So how long then, until after these laws are in place, will it take for some of these released detainees to be put back behind bars?
Well, it's a good question. There's quite a long process. We will see the legislation finally pass the Parliament sometime tonight, and then the Governor-General has to sign off on it, give it royal assent. Then there's going to be a process that follows that. The Minister has to compile evidence, look at each case, compile evidence, get an expert to assess the person's behaviours, and then present the evidence to a court, and then a judge has to determine whether or not the person qualifies under the 70 pages of conditions that are in the new legislation to be put back into detention for 3 years, and then that would be reviewed every year. So it could take quite a while before we see anybody re-detained under this new provision.
Karen, we know at the moment there's something like 148 of these detainees that have been released already. Possibly that could eventually become more. Why is the government being so cagey about how many of them they're going to apply these new laws to?
Well, partly I think it's privacy. Partly there are rules around giving away information about individuals, and partly I think they're not sure. And that goes to the assessments they have to make about the nature of the offences that were committed, because this new regime will be relating to people who've committed violent or sexual offences punishable by 7 years jail or more. And there are a whole lot of factors that go into that assessment. So I do think they're not really sure exactly how many people they will apply to the court to have put back behind bars.
Karen, it's pretty unusual to see the Attorney-General yelling at a reporter. What prompted that?
Well, I think we're all pretty tough in this building. Gets a bit willing sometimes, but everyone can take it. I think he was frustrated. I think we should also understand his wife recently died, and he lost a Victorian Labor colleague this week. So there's a lot of sadness and stress in the building. But also, the question that he was being asked, he could interpret as asking him to apologise to the victims of alleged offenders who are now before the courts. And you can't ask ministers to do that really when there are proceedings pending. So I think that's possibly where some of the frustration came from as well.
You're up there in Parliament House right now. Who's running the show? Is it the government or Peter Dutton?
Well, it's been a bit of a confusion in the last few weeks. The government's making the laws, but they need the support of the parliament to pass them. The Greens have said we're not going to support you. They can't get enough from the crossbench, so they need the coalition. The government wants to pass them urgently. The coalition has said they need to do that, and that has meant that the opposition has really been calling the shots in terms of how tough these laws are going to be and what versions of these laws they will pass.
Karen, watching from afar, this whole episode, it looks a little bit like a bomb has gone off inside the government, and it's gone from something that looked reasonably functional to just not being on top of what is essentially a question of security and safety in the community. Is that a fair observation?
I think what's happened is the government was caught a bit short by the High Court, so there's a bit of responsibility for the High Court. There's a bit of responsibility here for the government. The opposition legitimately are holding them to account, but the opposition is also taking the political opportunity to really hammer something they think they can score points on. And that's what's creating the atmosphere that you're talking about, and they're doing that deliberately because it suits them politically to do that. So the government's got to pull itself together and try and calm the situation down, and they'll be glad when the Parliament has risen, I think, to try and do that.
All right, Karen, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.